The white pickup truck had been following them for 47 miles. Sandra Keller knew because she'd been counting. She'd started counting somewhere outside Barstow when the truck first appeared in her rearview mirror on Interstate 15, and something in her stomach told her it wasn't a coincidence. She'd changed lanes 3 times. The truck changed lanes 3 times. She'd slowed to 60. The truck slowed to 60. She'd pushed it back up to 78, watched the speedometer needle climb with her heartbeat, and the truck had climbed right alongside it, maintaining exactly 4 car lengths of distance, never more, never less, like whoever was behind the wheel had measured the gap and decided that was the right amount of space to be terrifying without being obvious. Sandra was 39 years old, a pediatric nurse from Las Vegas, driving her daughter home from a weekend visit with her own mother in Riverside. Cora was 11, small for her age, with her father's dark eyes and Sandra's nervous habit of chewing the inside of her cheek when something felt wrong. Cora was doing it now, turned slightly in the passenger seat, watching the truck in the side mirror with the particular stillness of a child who has learned to read adult fear and is trying very hard not to add to it. The desert stretched out on both sides of the highway, brown and vast and indifferent, the kind of emptiness that felt beautiful on good days and suffocating on bad ones. The sun was dropping toward the western mountains, and the light was turning that amber color that made everything look like a movie. Except Sandra wasn't watching the light. She was watching that truck. She'd tried calling her husband Danny twice. It had gone to voicemail both times. She'd called her mother back in Riverside and talked for 3 minutes before the call dropped, because cell service on this stretch of 15 was notoriously unreliable, and now she was alone with her daughter and 47 miles of proof that someone had decided they were worth following. She hadn't called 911 yet. She kept talking herself out of it. She kept thinking about how she would sound. "Officer, a truck is behind me," and they would ask her if it had done anything, and the answer was no. It had only been there, only maintained that precise and patient distance, only made her feel like prey. And she wasn't sure that was enough, wasn't sure that would translate over the phone into the urgency that was climbing her throat right now. Then Cora said something quietly, without turning from the window. "Mom, he's right behind us." The truck had closed the distance. Not dramatically, not with a sudden roar of engine, but the gap had shrunk from 4 car lengths to 1, and at highway speed, 1 car length was almost nothing, and Sandra felt every hair on the back of her neck stand at attention. She pressed the accelerator down and watched the speedometer push past 85, watched the truck push with her, and now there was no pretending this was a coincidence. Now there was only the highway, and the desert, and the fading light, and a man in a white truck who didn't want to let them go. She saw the motorcycles before she consciously registered what they were. 5 of them, riding in loose formation in the left lane about a quarter mile ahead, their taillights glowing red in the dimming evening. Big bikes, the kind you heard before you saw them, chrome catching the last of the sunlight. And Sandra Keller made a decision that she would spend the rest of her life knowing was the right one. She put on her hazard lights. Her hazard. She didn't know why hazard lights specifically. It wasn't a rational choice. It was a mother's instinct translated into the only language the road offered her. Something is wrong. Someone please notice. Please. The motorcycles didn't slow immediately. For 20 agonizing seconds, Sandra watched them maintain their speed, and she thought they hadn't seen her or hadn't understood, and she pressed her hand against the horn and held it, one long note of desperation cutting through the wind noise on the highway. Cora grabbed her mother's arm. The truck was still right there, 1 car length, close enough that she could see the truck's front grille filling most of her rearview mirror. Then, the last rider in the formation, a big man on a dark blue Road King, looked back. He looked back the way people do when something cuts through the noise and demands attention, and Sandra saw his helmeted head turn, held her breath, pressed the horn again, and watched him raise a fist to signal his group. The formation changed. The riders shifted, discussed something she couldn't hear, and then the last 2 bikes dropped back and moved into the right lane, slowing, positioning themselves one on each side of Sandra's sedan like they were being placed there deliberately. And the first 3 moved in ahead of her, and for a moment the entire configuration felt almost choreographed. 5 motorcycles and 1 frightened woman forming something new on that desert highway. The rider who'd looked back pulled up alongside Sandra's driver's window, and she lowered the glass and the desert air hit her face, and she had to raise her voice over the wind in the engines. She told him the truck had been following her for nearly 50 miles. She told him it had just closed the distance. She told him she had her daughter in the car. She didn't tell him she was scared because he could already see that. It was written in her face and her white-knuckled grip on the wheel and the way Cora was pressed back into her seat, watching this stranger with enormous, trusting eyes. The man didn't ask her if she was sure. He didn't ask her what exactly the truck had done or whether she had any proof. He looked in his own mirror at the white pickup, looked back at Sandra, and said that they had her and to stay between them and not to change speed. His voice was even and calm, the kind of calm that isn't the absence of awareness, but the presence of it. And Sandra felt something loosen in her chest for the first time in 47 miles. His name was Roy Castillo, 53 years old, ride captain for the Desert Ironmen MC out of Henderson, Nevada. He'd spent 12 years as a Maricopa County Sheriff's deputy before a knee injury had pulled him off patrol work and into a desk job he'd lasted 14 months in before retiring. The Ironmen weren't a large club, 9 members in good standing, 5 of them on this stretch of highway headed home from a memorial ride in San Bernardino for a brother who'd died the previous winter, a man named Gerald who'd always said the desert highway was the only church he needed. They rode it every year now in his memory, and they were tired and road-worn and 2 hours from home, and not one of them hesitated when Roy's fist went up. The formation they created around Sandra's sedan wasn't something they'd practiced or planned. It assembled itself from instinct and the wordless communication that develops between people who have ridden together for years, who know each other's rhythms and reactions the way musicians know a piece of music they've played 100 times. 2 bikes rode slightly ahead in the left lane, holding steady. 2 rode flanking, one at Sandra's driver's side, one at Cora's window, where a man with a silver beard and kind eyes gave the girl a brief nod when she looked at him with those wide, frightened eyes. And Roy stayed behind, between Sandra's sedan and the white truck, a deliberate and visible presence that was communicating something very clear to whoever was in that pickup. We see you. We're watching. This woman is not alone. The truck slowed. The gap that had been 1 car length stretched back to 3, then 5, then 8. Roy kept his position. The 2 riders flanking Sandra held steady. Cora, who had been silent since her mother lowered the window, pressed her face toward the glass and watched the man with the silver beard and then looked back at her mother and said that they were like a wall. Sandra nodded because her throat was too tight for words. They rode like that for 11 miles, the Ironmen and the sedan and the truck behind them, everything suspended in that amber desert light, the highway unspooling through the emptiness. Roy had called 911 from his bike's Bluetooth system the moment he'd dropped back into position, had given them the location and direction of travel in the truck's plates, had been told that a Nevada Highway Patrol unit was 12 minutes out. He'd relayed this to Sandra in a brief window-down exchange and watched the information move through her face like a wave. First the clenching of her jaw, then the slow exhale that comes when you realize you might actually be okay. The patrol unit appeared in the oncoming lanes first, lights going, then crossed the median at an emergency access point and fell in behind the white pickup. The truck's brake lights flared. It slowed. It pulled to the shoulder. Roy Castillo watched it stop in his mirror and kept his own position for another 30 seconds, making sure before pulling up alongside Sandra one more time. She was crying. She wasn't embarrassed about it. She asked him why they had stopped, why they had turned around from wherever they were going and done this for a stranger. Roy thought about Gerald, who had died the previous winter, who had always said that the desert highway had a way of putting you exactly where you needed to be. He thought about 12 years of knowing what it looked like when someone needed help and was afraid to ask loudly enough. He thought about Cora's face when she'd said they were like a wall, the particular relief of a child who has seen the wall go up between herself and the thing that was frightening her. He told Sandra that they weren't going anywhere she was going, but that it didn't matter where a person was going when someone needed them on the road. He told her she'd done the right thing by signaling. He told her a lot of people would have just called 911 and hoped, and that putting those hazards on and leaning on the horn had taken nerve. Sandra looked at him for a long moment, and then she asked if they would stay until the trooper came back to tell her what was happening, if they would just stay close a little longer. Every one of the Ironmen shut off their engines and waited. The Nevada Highway Patrol trooper's name was Michelle Okafor, and she'd been on this stretch of Interstate 15 for 6 years, long enough to know that the desert had a way of making people feel invisible, both the ones who needed help and the ones who meant harm. She was 36, precise in her movements, with the particular economy of motion that comes from years of approaching unknown situations on the side of a highway where anything could happen, and usually something did. She walked back from the white pickup with her notepad in her hand, and her expression professionally neutral. And when she reached Sandra's window, she asked her to step out of the vehicle so they could speak privately. They stood at the front of the sedan while Cora watched from inside, and the 5 Iron Men waited at a respectful distance, engines off, some of them stretching road-stiffened legs, one of them having produced a water bottle from a saddlebag and passed it wordlessly to Cora through the window she'd opened an inch, which the girl accepted with the gravity of someone receiving something important. Trooper Okafor told Sandra that the man in the truck was named Douglas Fenner, 44 years old, with 2 prior restraining order violations in California, one filed by a former coworker and one by a neighbor. She told her that Fenner claimed he had simply been driving to Las Vegas and didn't know Sandra or her vehicle. She told her that the plates on the truck had come back to a rental agency in San Bernardino, rented that morning. She told her all of this in a careful and measured way, and then she asked Sandra if she recognized the name Douglas Fenner or if she had any connection to San Bernardino. Sandra said no. Okafor nodded slowly. She said that without a provable threat or a traffic violation, she was limited in what she could do tonight, but that she was running Fenner's full history, and that the restraining order violations were enough to flag him for a mandatory check-in with his parole officer, and that she was going to escort Sandra and her daughter to the Nevada state line herself, which was 40 minutes up the road, and that she would be making sure Fenner understood he was being watched. She paused, and then she said something that Sandra would remember for a long time afterward. She said that Sandra had done something smart on that highway, something that a lot of people in her situation didn't think to do, and that the outcome of this stop could have been very different if she had been alone when Fenner closed that distance. She looked toward the Iron Men with the measured respect of a professional, acknowledging something she couldn't officially endorse and wouldn't officially criticize. Roy Castillo was leaning against his Road King with his arms folded when Sandra walked over to them. She didn't have a speech prepared. She'd been a pediatric nurse for 14 years, and she was accustomed to high-stress situations and the strange clarity they produced, and she knew that what she wanted to say was simple, and that simple was enough. She told them that she and Cora would have been alone out there. She told them that when Cora had said he's right behind us, she had felt the particular helplessness of a parent who cannot move fast enough or think clearly enough to get between their child and something bad, and that the moment she'd seen Roy's helmeted head turn and look back at her, that helplessness had started to lift. She told them she didn't know how to thank people who had given her that. Roy said she already had by putting those hazards on and asking. One of the other riders, a compact and quiet man named Vincent, who'd been with the Iron Men for 9 years and said very little on a normal day, crouched down beside Cora's window and asked the girl how she was doing in the tone adults use when they genuinely want to know and aren't in a hurry. Cora considered the question seriously, the way 11-year-olds do when they've decided an adult deserves a real answer, and said she was okay now, but that it had been really scary when the truck got close. Vincent told her that scared was the right response to something worth being scared of, and that the fact that her mother had acted so quickly was something Cora should be proud of, and that the two of them together had handled something hard in exactly the right way. Cora looked at him for a moment, and then she asked if his motorcycle was the blue one, and he said it was, and she said it was a good color for a wall. Vincent smiled at that. Several of the other men did too. Trooper Okafor escorted them all the way to the state line, her cruiser maintaining a steady presence behind Sandra's sedan while the 5 Ironmen rode in their loose formation around her, and somewhere in those 40 minutes, Sandra felt the adrenaline begin to metabolize and the shaking start in her hands, the delayed physical acknowledgement of what the last 90 minutes had actually been. Cora noticed and reached over without comment and put her hand over her mother's on the steering wheel. And Sandra let her leave it there for the rest of the drive to the state line, because sometimes comfort doesn't need a reason or an explanation. It just needs to be offered and accepted. At the Nevada border, the trooper pulled off with a brief flash of her lights, acknowledgement and farewell in a single gesture. The Iron Men rode another 2 miles with Sandra before Roy signaled and the formation began to open, the riders peeling off one by one back toward Henderson, back toward the lives they had interrupted without hesitation on a desert highway, because a woman had put on her hazard lights and leaned on her horn and trusted that someone would look back. Sandra pulled off at a gas station just inside Nevada and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes with the engine running. Cora didn't ask her to keep moving. She understood without being told that her mother needed the stillness. They sat together while the sky went fully dark and the gas station lights buzzed softly and the highway traffic streamed past, ordinary and oblivious. And after a while, Sandra called Danny, and this time he answered, and she told him everything, all of it. From the first moment she'd noticed the truck in Barstow to the moment the last motorcycle had peeled away. And she heard him go quiet in the way he did when something had moved him past words. She looked up Douglas Fenner's name when she got home that night, after Cora was in bed, after Danny had held her for a long time without speaking. She found an arrest record in California from 3 years prior, a harassment charge that had been pleaded down, and the restraining order violations that Okafor had mentioned, and a pattern that made her feel cold and certain and grateful in equal measure. She forwarded everything she found to Okafor's department email and received a reply 2 days later, saying the information had been added to Fenner's file and that his parole officer had been formally notified. She found the Iron Men's community page through a series of searches that took her most of an evening and left her a message that she spent 40 minutes writing and then deleted and rewrote in 3 sentences. She said that she and her daughter were safe and home, that she had thought about what to say to them for 2 days and couldn't find words that were adequate, and that she hoped they knew that what they'd done on that highway was the reason her daughter was sleeping in her own bed that night, instead of something she couldn't bring herself to finish writing. She thanked them for looking back. Roy Castillo saw the message the following Sunday morning and read it twice before showing it to the other 4 members who'd been on that ride. They passed his phone around the clubhouse table without much comment, because the Iron Men were not a demonstrative group and didn't require ceremony for the things that mattered. But Bull, the man with the silver beard who had passed Cora the water bottle, said quietly that Gerald would have liked knowing about this one. And that was enough. The Iron Men added something to their annual memorial ride the following year. Before they started their engines on the morning of the ride, they took 5 minutes in the parking lot of the gas station where they always gathered, and Roy said a few words about Gerald, and then he said a few words about paying attention, about the particular responsibility that came with being visible on the road, about how a wall was only useful if someone built it in time. It wasn't a long speech. The Iron Men were not given to long speeches, but the members who were there that morning said it was the one that stuck. Cora Keller turned 12 the following spring and asked her mother for a specific birthday gift. She wanted to take a self-defense class. She wanted to learn how to be loud when something was wrong, how to signal, how to make herself heard. Sandra enrolled her the following week, and on the first day of class, when the instructor asked the students why they were there, Cora said she'd learned on a highway in the desert that asking for help was not weakness, but strategy, and that the world had more people willing to look back than most people believed, but that you had to be willing to use your hazard lights. The instructor didn't ask her what she meant. The way she said it, quiet and certain, made the meaning clear enough. There are stretches of road in this country where the emptiness can feel absolute, where the distance between you and help seems too wide to cross. But the truth that Sandra Keller learned on Interstate 15, somewhere between Barstow and the Nevada state line with a white truck filling her mirror and her daughter's hand on hers, is that the distance is almost never as wide as the fear makes it feel. That there are people on that road who will look back if you can find a way to ask. That a wall can be built in seconds by people who have never met you and owe you nothing and choose to stop anyway, because the alternative is watching something bad happen on a highway in the dark and living with that for the rest of their lives. And that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is put on their hazard lights and trust that someone is paying attention. Someone usually is.